I came home unannounced and saw a car I knew too well, Claire's, parked right next to Daniel's like it belonged there, like it had been there before. I sat in my car with the engine still running, staring at it, waiting for some reasonable explanation to rise up and steady me. Nothing did. Just a slow sinking feeling that started in my chest and worked its way down. I cut the engine. The silence that followed felt louder than anything. For a moment I considered leaving, pretending I hadn't seen it, giving myself one more night of not knowing. But my hands were already moving. Door, keys, steps up the driveway that felt longer than they ever had. The front door wasn't fully closed. That was the first thing that felt wrong in a way I couldn't ignore. Daniel was meticulous about things like that. Doors locked, lights off, everything in its place. I pushed it open slowly. "Hello." No answer. But I heard something. Not loud, not obvious. Just enough to make my body go still before my mind caught up. A shift, a breath. The kind of sound you only notice when you're already on edge. I stepped inside, setting my bag down without looking away from the hallway. And then I heard it again. Upstairs. I don't remember deciding to move, but I did. One step, then another. My hand slid along the wall as I climbed, like I needed the house itself to hold me steady. Halfway up, my stomach tightened so sharply I had to stop. "This is nothing," I told myself. "You're overreacting." But my body didn't believe that. At the top of the stairs, the bedroom door was slightly open. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not calm, just muted, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away. I pushed the door open. They froze. For a second, just one, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It didn't make sense. The shapes were familiar, but the meaning wasn't. And then it hit all at once, like something dropping through my chest. Claire, Daniel, my best friend, my husband, in my bed. The air in the room felt thick, like I couldn't get enough of it into my lungs. I reached for the doorframe without thinking, my fingers gripping it hard enough to hurt. You were supposed to be in Denver," Daniel said. His voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another room. I swallowed, but my throat was tight. Flight got canceled. Claire pulled the sheet up, but it was too late for that. "There are things you can't cover once they've been seen." "I can explain," she said quickly. I looked at her then, really looked, searching for something, guilt, shame, anything that made this feel less deliberate. "What part?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was steady, controlled. That surprised me more than anything. Daniel swung his legs off the bed, standing too fast. "It's not what it looks like." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the most predictable thing he could have said. "Then help me understand," I replied. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, panic maybe, or calculation. Claire didn't speak again. The silence stretched. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, now loud and uneven. For a second I thought I might be sick. I turned away before that could happen. "I'm not doing this right now," I said. "Wait." Daniel stepped toward me. I held up a hand without looking back. "Don't." He stopped. I walked out of the room, down the stairs, each step too loud in the quiet house. My hands were shaking now. Not violently, but enough that I noticed. I grabbed my keys from the table. I don't remember picking them up earlier. I don't remember putting my bag down. Details were slipping. "Please just let me explain," Daniel called from the top of the stairs. I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. Not because I was considering it, but because a part of me needed to hear what he thought could possibly justify this. I turned slightly enough to see him without fully facing him. "Explain what?" I asked. "How long? Or why her?" He didn't answer. That told me everything I needed to know. I opened the door and stepped outside. The air hit me harder than I expected. Cooler, sharper, real. I got into my car and shut the door, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left. For a few seconds I just sat there. Then my breath hitched. Once, twice, and then it broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet collapse I couldn't hold back anymore. My forehead dropped against the wheel, and I stayed there, shoulders tight, trying to breathe through something that didn't feel like it had an end. I didn't know how long I sat like that. Eventually, I started the car. I pulled out of the driveway without looking at the house again. I drove. 3 blocks. 5. 10. At some point, I realized I had no idea where I was going. That stopped me more than anything else. I pulled into an empty parking lot and turned off the engine. The silence came back, but this time it didn't feel as heavy, just still. Daniel and Claire. I said their names out loud. They were the 2 people I trusted most. Hearing it made it real in a way nothing else had yet. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the ceiling of the car. Questions came fast and uninvited. How long did everyone know? Was I the only one who didn't see it? I closed my eyes. This is not your fault, I thought. But the doubt was already there, quiet and persistent. I sat like that for a long time before reaching for my phone. 8 missed calls. All from Daniel. I turned the screen off without listening to a single voicemail. I wasn't ready for his version of this. Not yet. Not tonight. I started the car again, this time with a direction in mind. My sister's place. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a plan. But it was somewhere I could go where nothing had been broken yet. And right then, that was enough. I don't remember much about the drive to my sister's house. Not because it was far, but because my mind kept slipping in and out like it couldn't stay in one place long enough to process what had just happened. I missed a turn I'd taken 100 times before, stopped at a green light without realizing it. At one point, a car honked behind me and I flinched so hard my hands tightened around the wheel until my knuckles turned pale. It all felt disconnected, like I was watching myself from somewhere just outside my own body. By the time I pulled into her driveway, the sky had already darkened. I sat there for a minute, engine off, staring at the porch light. I almost didn't go in. Not because I didn't want to see her, but because walking through that door would make everything real in a way I wasn't sure I could handle. But I couldn't go back, so I grabbed my bag, stepped out, and walked up to the door before I could change my mind. She opened it before I knocked. "I saw your car," she said, her voice soft but alert. "Everything okay?" I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out. She didn't press, just stepped aside and let me in. The warmth of the house hit me, immediately familiar, steady, untouched by anything that had just happened. It made my chest tighten in a different way. "I made tea," she said, like this was any other night, like she instinctively knew not to ask too many questions too soon. I nodded, setting my bag down by the couch. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. I wrapped my hands around the mug more for something to hold than anything else. The heat seeped into my palms, grounding me in a way nothing else had yet. She watched me carefully. "You want to tell me?" she asked after a moment. I stared at the surface of the tea. "I came home early," I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. And I exhaled slowly. Claire's car was there. Her expression shifted immediately, subtle but unmistakable. "And Daniel?" she asked. I let out a quiet, humorless breath. "Upstairs. With her." She didn't say anything right away, didn't gasp, didn't react dramatically, just sat with it. That helped more than anything. "I'm sorry," she said finally. I nodded, but the words didn't land yet. They felt like they were meant for someone else. I didn't even react the way I thought I would. I admitted. I just stood there, like I couldn't catch up to it. "That's shock," she said gently. "Yeah," I replied. "I guess it is." Silence settled between us again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "I left," I added. I didn't stay to hear anything. "Good." I looked up at her. "Good," I repeated. "You don't owe anyone an immediate response to something like that," she said. "You get to decide when and if you want to hear it." I let that sink in. Because part of me had already started wondering if I'd handled it wrong. If I should have stayed, asked more questions, demanded answers. But the truth was, I didn't have the capacity for that in that moment. "I keep thinking I should feel more..." something I said. "You will," she replied. It just doesn't all show up at once. I nodded slowly. That made sense. Because even sitting there I could feel it shifting under the surface, not gone, not resolved, just waiting. I'm not going back tonight, I said after a while. Of course not, she answered. You'll stay here as long as you need. I swallowed a small knot forming in my throat again. Thank you. She gave a small nod like it didn't need to be said. Later that night she showed me to the guest room, same room I'd stayed in years ago during a move. Same quilt, same lamp, same quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after she closed the door. The house was still. No footsteps upstairs, no familiar sounds, no shared space, just me. And the silence. I lay down staring at the ceiling, expecting exhaustion to take over. It didn't. My mind started filling in the gaps. Daniel and Claire. Together. Not just physically, but all the small moments that must have led there. The conversations I wasn't part of. The looks I didn't notice. The times they were in the same room and I felt completely at ease. That part hit harder than anything else. Not the act itself, but the fact that it had been happening in plain sight and I had trusted it completely. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket tighter around me. Was I blind? Or did I just not want to see? I replayed the last few months in fragments. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would have made me question either of them in a real way. Which somehow made it worse. Because it meant they had been careful. Intentional. A dull ache settled in my chest. I pressed my hand against it like that would do anything. At some point my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I ignored it. A few minutes later it buzzed again. And again. I reached over and turned it face down without checking. I didn't need to see the name. I knew it was him. And I wasn't ready. Not to hear his voice, not to read his words, not to sit through whatever version of this he was going to try to explain. I closed my eyes. Sleep came in short, uneven stretches. Every time I drifted off, something pulled me back, a thought, an image, a half-formed question. By morning I didn't feel rested, but I felt clearer, not better, just less scattered. I got up, made my way to the kitchen, and found my sister already there pouring coffee. She glanced at me, taking in the exhaustion without commenting on it. "How are you holding up?" she asked. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "I don't know yet," I admitted. She handed me a mug. "That's honest," she said. I nodded, staring into the coffee. I think I need a day," I added, "just to sit with it before I decide anything." "That sounds like a good plan." I hesitated. "And then I'll talk to him." She didn't respond right away this time. Just studied me for a second. "On your terms," she said finally. "Yes," I replied. That part at least I was sure about. Because whatever happened next, I wasn't walking into it unprepared. Mourning didn't fix anything, but it gave the pain edges I could see. I stayed at my sister's through most of the day, moving slowly like my body had to relearn ordinary tasks. Coffee, a shower, folding the same sweater twice because I forgot I'd already done it. My phone buzzed on and off on the kitchen counter. I didn't check it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to let his words shape what I knew. Around noon I stepped out onto the back porch. The air was cooler than I expected, a thin wind pushing through the trees. For a while I just stood there watching a neighbor rake leaves into a neat pile, the rhythm of it steady, predictable. It grounded me in a way I didn't have to think about. Daniel, Claire. I said their names again, this time without the shock. Just facts. 2 people, 2 choices. Behind me the screen door creaked open. My sister leaned against the frame, arms crossed loosely. "You going to call him today?" "I think so," I said. "Not here." She nodded, understanding. "Want me to come with you?" "No." I shook my head. "I need to hear it without any buffer." "Okay." She paused. "Then at least eat something first." I managed a small smile. "I will." By mid-afternoon I had a plan simple enough to follow. I'd go back to the house, not to stay but to talk. I'd keep it contained. No spiraling, no getting pulled into explanations that blurred the obvious. On the drive over, my hands were steady, but my jaw was tight. I noticed it when I tried to swallow and felt the tension there like a wire pulled too taut. I loosened my grip on the steering wheel and forced a breath out slow and even. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel's car was there. Claire's wasn't. A small practical detail, but it landed. Whatever had happened between them, she wasn't here now. Good. I sat for a second looking at the house. It didn't look different. Same porch, same windows, same place I'd walked into 100 times without thinking. I got out before I could second guess it. The door was locked this time. I unlocked it with my key and stepped inside. The air felt stale, like the house had been holding its breath. I set my bag on the table in the entryway exactly where I had the night before and closed the door behind me. "Daniel," I called. He appeared from the living room almost immediately, like he'd been waiting within earshot. He looked worse than I expected, unshaven eyes, tired shirt, wrinkled like he hadn't changed since yesterday. "Thank God," he said, stepping toward me. "I didn't know if you'd stop." I held up a hand. "We're not doing that." He froze mid-step. "Sit," I said, nodding toward the couch. He hesitated, then did as I asked. I took the chair across from him, keeping a deliberate distance between us. The space mattered. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he started. "I've been calling. I left messages. I didn't listen to them," I said. "I wanted to hear it in person." He swallowed, nodding. "Okay, that's fair." "Start with this," I said, my voice even. "How long?" He looked down at his hands. "A few months." The words landed flat and heavy. "Be specific." "3," he said quietly. "About 3 months." I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch just long enough for it to settle between us. "And before that," I asked. He frowned. "What do you mean?" I said, "people don't go from nothing to that overnight." "So before that, what was it?" He rubbed his forehead. "It wasn't planned. It just built. We talked more. You were traveling. We were both here, and it just happened. I finished for him." He nodded quickly, relieved I'd said it. I didn't let him have that relief. "Don't simplify it," I said. "You had choices every step of the way." His shoulders dropped. "I know, I'm not saying I didn't. I'm just trying to explain how it got there." "Explain why you didn't stop," I replied. That took longer. He looked up at me, searching for something understanding, maybe, or a way to soften what he was about to say. I felt disconnected, he said finally. "From you. From us. You were always busy, always somewhere else. And when Claire was around, it was easy. She listened. It felt like I mattered again. There it was. I felt something shift in my chest, not a sharp pain this time, but something colder, clearer. So instead of talking to me, I said, "You started something with my best friend. It wasn't like that," he insisted. "I didn't go looking for it. It just Daniel." I cut him off, my voice firmer now. "You don't accidentally end up in bed with someone, not once, not repeatedly." He flinched. "I know," he said. "I know how it sounds. It sounds exactly like what it is." Silence again. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I made a mistake." I shook my head slowly. A mistake is forgetting something at the store. This was a pattern. He closed his eyes for a second, like he didn't have a counter-argument. "I ended it," he said. "Last night. After you left." I told her it was over. I studied him, not reacting immediately. Why, I asked. Because I realized what I was about to lose. I let out a quiet breath. "You realized that after you got caught." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said calmly. "It's accurate." He sat back, frustrated. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth," I answered. "Not the version that makes this easier to accept." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once, like something in him finally settled. "Okay," he said. "The truth is, I liked how it felt. I liked the attention. I liked not having to deal with the distance between us. And I didn't think about the consequences until you walked in that room. There it was. No excuses, no softening, just truth. It hurt, but it was clean." I leaned back in my chair, letting that sit between us. "Thank you," I said. He blinked, surprised. "For what?" "For not pretending it was something else." He nodded slowly. "So what now?" he asked. I met his eyes. "Now," I said, "I decide what I'm willing to live with." The next morning I woke before the alarm, though I didn't remember falling asleep. For a moment I didn't know where I was. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, the light softer than it should have been. Then it came back, not all at once, but in pieces. The car in the driveway. Claire's laugh, Daniel's voice behind a door that was supposed to be mine. I sat up slowly. My body felt heavy, like I'd been carrying something all night. Maybe I had. From down the hall I could hear my sister moving around in the kitchen. The quiet rhythm of cabinets opening, the low hum of a coffee maker, ordinary sounds that felt strangely grounding. I stayed where I was for a minute longer, breathing, letting the room settle around me. Then I got up. By the time I reached the kitchen, she had already poured 2 cups of coffee. She didn't say anything at first, just slid one across the counter toward me. I wrapped my hands around the mug, grateful for the warmth. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Some," I said. It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. She studied my face for a second, like she was deciding how much to push. Then she nodded, accepting the answer for what it was. "What's the plan?" she asked, straightforward as always. I took a sip of coffee. It was strong, a little bitter, exactly how I needed it. "I go back," I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Today?" "Yes." There was a pause, not judgmental, just careful. "Okay," she said. "You want me there?" I shook my head. "No, I need to do this on my own." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, considering me. "Then at least have a plan before you walk in." "I do." That wasn't entirely true. I had pieces of a plan, enough to keep me from walking in blind. "I'm not going to argue," I continued. "I'm not going to ask for explanations I already know the answers to. I'm just going to set things in motion." "Lawyer?" she asked. "Yes." "Finances?" "I'll start pulling everything today?" She nodded again, this time more firmly. "Good." We stood there in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then she reached out and squeezed my hand, quick, steady. "Whatever happens in that house," she said, "don't let them rewrite it." I met her eyes. "I won't." The drive back felt shorter than it should have. Maybe because I wasn't running anymore. As I turned onto our street, my stomach tightened, but not the way it had the night before. This was different. Sharper, more focused. Daniel's car was in the driveway. Claire's wasn't. That made sense. Whatever illusion they'd built the night before didn't survive daylight. I parked on the street instead of pulling in. I didn't want to feel like I was arriving home. Not yet. For a moment I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the front door. Then I got out. The air was cool, the kind of crisp morning that usually made me feel awake, optimistic. Today it just felt neutral. Blank. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house looked exactly the same. That was the strange part. Nothing was overturned, nothing broken. The couch still had the throw blanket I'd left draped over it. A mug sat in the sink. The faint scent of Claire's perfume lingered in the air, almost gone, but not quite. Footsteps sounded from the hallway. Daniel appeared a second later. He looked like he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt in a way that wasn't intentional. For a second, we just stared at each other. "Hey," he said. The word landed flat between us. "Hey," I replied. Another pause. He ran a hand through his hair like he was trying to find the right version of this conversation. "I didn't think you'd come back so soon," he said. "I wasn't planning to stay away," I answered. He nodded, swallowing. "Right, of course." Silence stretched again, heavier this time. "I'm glad you're here," he said finally. "We should talk." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "We are talking," I said. He shifted his weight. Really talk. "About what exactly?" His eyes flickered like he wasn't sure where to start. "About last night. About how it happened." There it was. The first attempt at explanation. Not an apology. Not yet. "I don't need a timeline," I said calmly. "It's not just a timeline," he insisted. "It's more complicated than that." "It usually is." He exhaled sharply, frustration creeping in. "Can you just listen for a second?" I held his gaze. "I am listening." Another pause, then he started. It didn't start the way you think, he said. Claire and we've been under a lot of stress at work. Late nights projects. We just talked more. Connected. I didn't interrupt. It wasn't planned, he continued. It just happened. There it was, the line people reach for when they don't want to own a choice. Things don't just happen, Daniel, I said quietly. He flinched at his name. You know what I mean? I do, I replied. You made a series of decisions. That's what you mean. His jaw tightened. You're making it sound like what I asked, intentional. He didn't answer. Because it was. Silence again, thicker now. I didn't mean for you to get hurt, he said softer this time. That almost did it. Not anger, not shouting, just that sentence so carefully worded, so completely missing the point. I felt something shift inside me, not break, not explode. Settle. I'm not here to discuss your intentions, I said. He frowned. Then what are you here for? I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder I'd put together that morning, blank pages mostly. But it didn't need to be full yet. I'm here to be clear, I said. He looked at the folder, then back at me. Clear about what? About what happens next. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. You're talking about divorce. I'm talking about ending this marriage, I said evenly. The word hung between us. For a moment, he just stared at me like he hadn't expected me to say it out loud, like he thought we'd circle around it for days, maybe weeks. You're serious, he said. Yes. He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. So that's it. You walk in, see something you don't like, and suddenly it's over. Something cold settled under my ribs. Something I don't like, I repeated. You know what I mean, he said quickly. I'm saying it's not that simple. It is for me. That's not fair, he shot back. Don't I get a say in this? I met his eyes. You already had your say. That landed. He looked away first. I made a mistake, he muttered. No, I said. You made a choice. He pressed his lips together like he was holding back something sharper. So what you're just done, no counseling, no trying to fix it. I considered that for a moment, not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to answer honestly. I think you already made it clear what you're willing to invest in this marriage, I said. That's not, he started. I'm not interested in negotiating my own self-respect, I added. That stopped him. The room went quiet again, but this time it felt different, less like tension, more like conclusion. I'll have my lawyer reach out, I continued. We can handle everything through them, finances, property, all of it. His head snapped up. Lawyer already? Yes. When did you even... Last night, I said. That wasn't entirely true, but it didn't matter. He stared at me, something like realization dawning. You've been planning this. I've been preparing, I corrected. For what, walking away? For not staying where I'm not respected. He shook his head, pacing a few steps like he needed movement to process. This is insane. No, I said quietly, this is clear. He stopped, turning back to me. And Claire, he asked almost defensively, What do you think happens there? I held his gaze. That's your decision. You don't care, he challenged. The question hung in the air, sharp-edged. I thought about it. About the woman I'd been before last night. About the version of me who would have demanded answers, compared timelines, searched for meaning in every detail. I care about what I allow in my life, I said. And this isn't it. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Take whatever you need, he said after a moment, voice tighter now. We can figure out the rest later. I will, I replied. I turned toward the hallway, not waiting for permission, not asking anything else. Each step felt deliberate, grounded. Behind me I could feel him watching, but he didn't follow. Not this time. That afternoon I sat across from an attorney, a legal pad between us, details being mapped out in precise, unemotional terms. Assets, accounts, property. It was clinical. And in a way that helped. Because it reminded me that this wasn't just a moment of betrayal. It was a structure that needed to be dismantled carefully, correctly. You're in a strong position, the attorney said, reviewing the initial information. This won't be as complicated as some cases. I nodded. I'm not looking for complicated. Good, he said. Then we'll keep it straightforward. As I left the office, the late afternoon sun hit my face, warm and steady. For the first time since the night before, I felt something close to stable. Not healed, not even close. But aligned. And that was enough. The days that followed didn't explode into chaos the way I once would have expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no late-night arguments that stretched until morning. Instead, everything narrowed into something quieter, more procedural, and in that quiet, every decision felt heavier. I moved back into the house temporarily, not as a return but as a transition. Daniel stayed. We existed in the same space like two people waiting in different terminals, aware of each other, but no longer traveling together. We spoke only when necessary. Schedules, documents, logistics. Nothing more. On the third day, Claire showed up. I knew it before I opened the door. The knock was hesitant but not uncertain. The kind of knock that assumes access even after it's been revoked. When I opened it, she stood there in a pressed blazer. Her posture controlled her expression, carefully arranged somewhere between concern and restraint. "Hi," she said. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, measured. "Hi," I replied. For a moment, neither of us moved. "I was hoping we could talk," she said. "I figured you might," I answered. Another pause. "Can I come in?" I considered the question not emotionally but structurally. "No," I said. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't defensive. It was final. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or the realization that this wouldn't unfold the way she'd rehearsed it. "Okay," she said, recovering. "Then, here is fine." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, not to hide anything but to define the boundary. She noticed. "Look," she began, exhaling slightly. "I know how this looks." I almost stopped her there, but I let her continue. "It's not as simple as what you saw," she said. There it was again. That same instinct to soften reality by complicating it. "It actually is," I replied. Her lips pressed together. "You don't have all the context." "I don't need context," I said. "I walked into my home and saw you with my husband." She flinched, not dramatically, but enough to register. "We didn't mean for it to happen like that," she said. I tilted my head slightly. "How did you mean for it to happen?" That caught her off guard. "I'm serious," I added, calm but direct. What was the preferred version one where I found out later? Or never? She looked down briefly, then back at me. "That's not fair." "It's accurate." A car passed on the street behind her, the sound filling the space for a second before fading. "I didn't come here to argue," she said. "I came to explain." "Why?" The question landed cleanly. She hesitated. "Because I thought you deserved that." I studied her for a moment. "No," I said. "You came here to feel better about what you did." Her eyes sharpened slightly. "That's not true." "Then who is this explanation for?" I asked. "Because it doesn't change anything for me." Silence. She shifted her weight, the confidence in her posture starting to fracture at the edges. "I cared about you," she said, quieter now. That almost made me laugh, but I didn't. "You don't do this to people you care about," I replied. "It wasn't planned," she insisted. "It just developed." "That doesn't make it better." "I know that," she said quickly. "I'm just saying it wasn't malicious." I let that sit for a second. "Impact matters more than intent," I said. She looked at me like she wanted to push back but didn't have the footing. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said again. And yet I replied. Another silence. This one longer. "I'll step back," she said finally, "if that's what you want." That was new. Not an excuse, not a defense. An offer. I considered it not because I needed it, but because I wanted to understand what she thought she was offering. "This isn't about you stepping back," I said. "This is about me stepping out." Her brow furrowed. "Out of what?" This I gestured lightly toward the house. The marriage, the situation, all of it. "You're leaving him," she said. "Yes." The word didn't waver. She exhaled slowly. "I didn't expect that." "I didn't either," I said, "until I did." She looked at me more carefully now, like she was reassessing everything she thought she knew. "You seem calm," she said. "I'm clear," I corrected. "That's not the same thing." "No," I agreed, "but it's enough." Another pause stretched between us, but this one felt different, less like conflict, more like distance settling into place. "I am sorry," she said finally. This time it sounded less rehearsed. I believed that she felt something, just not enough to have made a different choice. "I hear you," I said, but I didn't say I accepted it. Because I didn't need to. She nodded slowly like she understood that. "I won't come back," she said. "That's your decision," I replied. She hesitated one more second, then turned and walked away. I watched her go, not with anger, not even with relief, just with finality. When I stepped back inside, Daniel was standing in the living room. He'd heard enough. "You talked to her," he said. "Yes." "What did she say?" I set my keys down on the table, taking my time before answering. "She said what people usually say in situations like this." He frowned, which is, that it wasn't planned, that it's complicated, that she didn't mean to hurt me. He looked away, jaw tightening. "And you don't believe her?" "I believe that's how she feels," I said. "I just don't think it matters." He let out a breath, pacing once across the room. "She said she'd step back," he added almost cautiously. "I'm sure she did." "That doesn't change anything for you?" he asked. I met his eyes. "No." Something in his expression shifted, frustration maybe, or the slow realization that there was no version of this where he regained control of the outcome. "So that's it," he said. "You're just done." "I've been clear about that." He shook his head, a short, disbelieving motion. "You're not even going to try." I held his gaze steady. "I did try," I said. "For years. Just not in a way that made headlines." That landed deeper than anything else I'd said. He didn't respond. "From here on," I continued, "anything we need to discuss goes through the attorneys." His eyes snapped back to mine. "That's cold." "No," I said quietly. "That's structured." Silence again. But there was nothing left in it. No tension. No unresolved questions. Just space. That night I packed the rest of my things. Not everything. Just what mattered. Clothes, documents, a few personal items. The rest could be sorted later. As I zipped the last bag, I looked around the room, not searching for memories, not holding on to anything. Just acknowledging it. Then I turned off the light. By the time I drove away, the house was already behind me. Not just physically, but completely. Closure doesn't arrive the way people think it does. It doesn't show up as a final conversation where everything is explained, every question answered, every emotion neatly resolved. It doesn't come with a clean ending, or a moment where you suddenly feel over it. For me, it came in fragments. Small, quiet confirmations that I had already made the right decision. 2 weeks after I moved out, the house was no longer mine in any practical sense. The paperwork had started moving. Accounts were being separated, assets documented, timelines formalized. My attorney kept everything precise, efficient, no unnecessary back and forth, no emotional detours. Daniel tried at first to reach out directly. A call. Then a text. Then another. "Can we talk just once, no lawyers?" I didn't respond. Not because I was trying to punish him, but because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been made clear. Eventually the messages stopped. I settled into a rhythm at my sister's place, not permanent, but steady enough to think. Mornings became structured. Coffee at the same time. A short walk around the block. Then hours spent organizing documents, making calls, rebuilding the parts of my life that had been tied too tightly to someone else's decisions. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The idea of calling my old business partner didn't come as a burst of inspiration. It came as hesitation. I sat with my phone in my hand for almost an hour that afternoon, staring at a name I hadn't tapped in years. We hadn't ended badly. Just incompletely. Life had moved in different directions, priorities shifted, and somewhere along the way I chose stability over risk. Now stability had proven itself to be something else entirely. I pressed call before I could overthink it again. "Hey," he answered after a couple of rings, his voice carrying a familiar mix of curiosity and caution. "It's been a while." "It has," I said. A pause, not awkward, just recalibrating. "What's going on?" he asked. I considered how much to say. "Everything changed," I replied, "and I'm looking at what comes next." Another pause, shorter this time. "You thinking about coming back?" he asked. "I'm thinking about building something again," I said. "The right way." He didn't answer immediately. I could almost hear him evaluating not just the idea, but me. "You'd do it differently this time?" he asked. "Yes." "That's a big word," he said, "differently." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm not rushing it." That seemed to land. "All right," he said finally. "Let's talk. Not a commitment, just a conversation. That's all I'm asking for." We set a time. When the call ended, I didn't feel triumphant. Just open. The meeting was set for 3 days later. In the meantime, I focused on what I could control. Legal progress. Financial clarity. And something I hadn't prioritized in a long time, my own decision-making process. No reacting. No adjusting around someone else's behavior. Just choosing deliberately. The cafe we met at was neutral ground. Not tied to old memories, not weighted with expectation. He was already there when I arrived, seated near the window, a notebook open in front of him. He stood when he saw me. "Good to see you," he said. "You too." We sat. For a moment, neither of us jumped straight into business. We observed, measured, not the situation but each other. "You look different," he said. "I am," I replied. He nodded slightly, like that confirmed something. So he leaned back, folding his arms loosely. "Tell me what you're thinking." I didn't pitch. I didn't try to impress. I outlined. Clear, structured, intentional. What I wanted to build. What I would do differently. Where I saw risk and how I planned to manage it. He asked questions. Direct ones. Not designed to trip me up but to test the foundation. And I answered them the same way. No overpromising. No defensiveness. Just clarity. At one point he stopped writing and looked at me more closely. "You're not trying to convince me," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm showing you how I think now." That seemed to matter more than anything else. We didn't make a deal that day. And I didn't expect to. But when we stood to leave, he extended his hand not as a formality, but as acknowledgement. "This could work," he said. Yes, I agreed it could. On the way back, I realized something I hadn't fully named yet. I wasn't trying to rebuild my old life. I was building a new one with the benefit of knowing exactly what I would no longer accept. That evening, as I pulled into my sister's driveway, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. The first in days. "I heard you met with him, about the business." I stared at the screen for a second, mildly surprised not by the message but by how little it affected me. Information traveled. That was fine. Another message followed. "You're really moving on." I considered ignoring it. Then I typed a response. Yes. Simple, accurate, complete. The reply came quickly this time. Was it that easy? I looked at the words for a long moment. Not because they confused me, but because they revealed something he still didn't understand. I typed slowly. No, it was that necessary. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No further messages came. That night I sat on the back porch, the air cooler now, the day finally settling. For the first time in weeks, there was no immediate next step waiting for me. No call to make. No document to review. No conversation to prepare for. Just space. I leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. Not relief. Not yet. But something close to it. If there was a single moment that felt like closure, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tied to Daniel or Claire or even the house. It was this sitting in a place that wasn't originally mine, building something that was, and realizing that nothing behind me had the authority to define what came next. If you've ever stood at a point where everything you trusted shifted under your feet, you know how disorienting that can be. It makes you question your judgment, your instinct, sometimes even your worth. But here's what I've learned through all of this. Clarity doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from deciding what you will and won't carry forward. If this story resonated with you, I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective. Where are you watching from, and what part of this hit closest to home? Share it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, real, grounded, and honest, consider subscribing. There's a lot more ahead and you won't want to miss what comes next. Let's keep going together.